The kettle let out a tired hiss as I reached for it, steam curling like breath in the cold kitchen air. My fingers weren't steady, though I told myself it was just the chill. I held the handle with both hands, watching the water pour into the teacup, like I'd done 1,000 mornings before. She was at the sink, rinsing a glass too hard, like it had offended her. She didn't turn around when I came in, just glanced at me over her shoulder, eyes quick and impatient, like I was already asking too much by being awake. I stared at the cup. It was old, chipped near the rim where James once bumped it on the counter. He used to call it my weathered one, said it looked like it had stories to tell. Now, under the gray light, it looked tired, but still, it held warmth better than this house ever could. "Did you want anything else?" she asked without looking. "No, thank you," I said softly. My voice sounded too careful, like it had learned to tiptoe. She nodded once and kept scrubbing. The blinds were bent from where the boy had pulled them last week. Little slivers of outside crept through, lighting the counter in narrow, pale lines. I followed one line with my eyes, tracing it across the old cutting board, across the empty mug beside the sink, until it disappeared beneath her arm. The table still had toast crumbs on it from breakfast. I hadn't been offered any. My hand trembled, again when I picked up the spoon to stir the tea. It wasn't the weight. It was the weight of being here and not being seen. Not really. I carried the cup to the table and sat down slowly, like I didn't want to offend the chair. The cushion was cold. From where I sat, I could see the hallway, still dark, still silent. The house hadn't woken up. It had simply allowed me to move inside it. I brought the cup to my lips and blew across the surface. The steam kissed my face, softer than any greeting I'd had this morning. And I thought, not for the first time, it's not the teacup that's shaking, it's me. The roast sat on the table, untouched, steam long gone. The rosemary I'd tucked beneath the skin had filled the kitchen earlier, warm and sharp, but now it just lingered in the air like something forgotten. I glanced at the clock. 6:47 p.m. I knew they weren't coming. Still, I waited until 7. I looked at the tree, those blinking lights James had insisted on buying the year we finally paid off the mortgage. They blinked like they were keeping time with my thoughts, soft and steady. I reached out and adjusted the ornament Ellie made in preschool. Her thumbprint is still there, painted into a red-nosed reindeer. They hadn't called, not this year. Not last year either. I sat down slowly at the end of the table, across from the 2 empty chairs I'd set out with cloth napkins. I pressed my palms into my lap and stared at the full glasses. Apple cider. I'd even warmed it. The candles flickered, just enough to make the reflection dance. There was no sadness, not really, not like the first time. It was quieter this year, quieter in a way that settled behind my ribs like folded paper. I wasn't surprised. Still, I cut a piece of the roast and placed it on my plate, even though I wasn't hungry. It felt wrong to make it and not try it. The crust had browned nicely. The inside is still pink like James liked it. "Next year," I whispered to No. 1. "I won't cook this much." The silence didn't answer, but the clock ticked in agreement. I didn't cry. I'd done that last Christmas when the first excuse came in a rushed text from my son. This year there were no excuses, just absence. And absence has its own sound, like a door that never opens. I left the table just as it was, lights blinking, cider cooling. I wrapped myself in James's old flannel robe, still faintly smelling of cedar, and sat by the fire. The roast would keep until morning. So would I. He sat across from me, his hand resting gently over mine. The lawyer watched us quietly, sliding. The papers across the oak desk with practiced hands. James cleared his throat. "Make sure it stays in her name," he said. His voice was calm, but there was no wiggle room in the way he said it. No confusion, no debate, just hers. I remember. Nodding, not saying anything? I didn't want to speak. I wanted to memorize the moment. His voice, the way the light slanted across his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped once against the wood like a final signature. The lawyer nodded too, scribbling something at the bottom of the form. I remember the smell of the place, old books, paper, and ink. A little lavender from my scarf too, wrapped around my neck, even though it was warm. I fiddled with the edge of it while James asked about witness signatures. The pen glided smooth across the paper. I watched James sign his name, strong, neat, full of a kind of faith I wasn't used to seeing anymore. And then he looked at me. "You'll be okay," he said. Not like a question, but like a truth he needed to hand me. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to hold it like the pen he'd just set down. But all I could do was nod again, pressing his hand between both of mine like I was sealing something in. 2 seasons later, I stood in a new kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear as I unfolded that same deed. The ink hadn't faded. His name is still there, bold and clear, and in that moment, with the paper in my hand, I felt something settle inside me. Not relief exactly, more like being covered, like he had pulled a blanket over me from far away. It wasn't a big envelope, manila with a small brass clasp. It didn't take up much space in my purse, but when I held it, I could feel the weight of it in my palm, like it carried more than paper. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers rubbing along the edge of the fabric where I'd stitched a lining the night before. Not fancy, just sturdy, hidden. The kind of sewing I used to do for Ellie's doll clothes back when her laughter filled every corner of this house. I threaded the needle slowly, steady. My eyes aren't what they used to be, but my hands still remember. Each stitch was a quiet promise to myself. This stays mine. This stays close. This stays quiet. I could hear the floor creaking upstairs as they moved about, unaware of what I was doing down here. The lamp glowed soft and gold beside me, and the scent of linen mixed with that old mothball smell from the closet. It was comforting, in a strange way, like the past reminding me it's still here. As I tucked the envelope into the pocket, I pressed my hand over it like I was sealing it inside me. I sat back, rocking gently. The creak of the chair matched the tick of the wall clock. Slow, patient. A rhythm that didn't rush me. This wasn't just about the house. It wasn't even about the paper. It was about choice, about holding something no one could take from me, not even if they tried. And though no one else saw it, I knew what I was carrying. A future I hadn't spoken of. A boundary I hadn't drawn yet. But would. The morning air had that kind of crispness that only autumn can give, cool on the face, but not quite cold enough to need a coat. I opened the front door slowly, half expecting someone to stop me. No one did. I carried in the last box myself. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. It felt good to do something on my own again. Even if it was just placing a box of casseroles and dish towels on the hallway floor. My daughter-in-law nodded from the kitchen. "Guest room's all yours," she said, like it was a favor. "Thank you," I smiled, setting the box down. I never mentioned the paper. Not once. Instead, I folded their towels with care, lined the bathroom cabinet with fresh shelf paper, and baked the cornbread my grandson liked. I stayed soft, steady. I told myself, love first, leverage later. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about offering one more chance, to them and maybe to me too. Maybe they'd come around. Maybe kindness would bloom again where the cold had settled. As I stood in the kitchen later that day, the scent of cinnamon rising from the oven, I thought about all the ways I'd chosen grace when I could have chosen power. And I still believed, deep down, that love was the louder language. The office was quiet in that reverent sort of way, Leather chairs made soft creaks. Dust danced in the sunbeams, slipping through the window. The clock on the wall ticked slow and even. I signed the document with a pen the assistant handed me. It was heavier than it looked. The lawyer glanced up at me, not surprised, not intrusive, just aware. He didn't ask why I was there alone. He didn't ask where my children were. He just nodded slightly as I slid the paper back across the desk. Outside, I could hear the faint sounds of traffic, horns muffled by distance. Life continues as if I hadn't just drawn a line no one else could cross. He cleared his throat. "We'll file this today." I nodded. There was nothing else to say. I reached into my purse and pulled out my checkbook, wrote the amount slowly, handed it over with the smallest of sighs. He stood as I did, held the door open gently, like I was someone worth that gesture. And in that quiet exit, I knew I'd done something permanent, not loud, but certain. I walked out into the sun, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. The wind followed me when I opened the door. Cold clung to my coat, and the brown paper bag rustled against my arm. Inside were apples, a bottle of Tylenol, and my grandson's allergy syrup. I'd even picked out the kind with the grape flavor he liked. I walked in slowly, boots still damp from the slush outside. At first I thought they were reorganizing. The hallway had boxes stacked neatly along the wall. But then I saw my pillow, folded, tucked under the edge of a cardboard box marked Ma in black marker. I stood there, still holding the groceries, trying to make sense of it. Nobody greeted me. No "Hi, Ma" or "Need help," just the hum of the refrigerator and the flicker of the kitchen light that always buzzed. My coat stayed zipped as I set the bag down carefully on the counter. The apples rolled slightly and stopped. I didn't unpack them. "Hello?" I called gently. No answer. I stepped closer to the boxes. There was my shawl, the red one James gave me after his last checkup. My slippers, a jar of pickled beets I kept, under the bed so I wouldn't forget where they were, all stacked like I'd been relocated. I opened my mouth to speak again, but didn't. There was a kind of weight in the silence that told me I'd walked into a decision already made. It wasn't the sadness I felt at first. It was something smaller, numb, like standing outside your own skin, like being furniture someone moved when it stopped matching the room. I touched the pillow gently. My fingers paused there for a second. And then with a breath, I walked toward the basement door, still wearing my coat. She was folding laundry on the couch, neat little stacks forming on the armrest like she was preparing for a photo. The smell of dryer sheets hung in the air and something was burning in the oven, probably dinner she'd forgotten while doing everything else. I stood in the hallway holding my scarf, twisting it slowly in my hands. She didn't turn to look at me. "We needed the guest room," she said, like she was answering a question I hadn't asked. I waited for more. Maybe an apology, a glance, even a softening of her voice. But nothing came. Just the shuffle of jeans being folded and stacked. I nodded, though I'm not sure why. It was the kind of nod you give when you've run out of places to store your pride. The kind you give when silence is the only thing you still own. She picked up a shirt and smoothed it against her thigh. Her wedding ring flashed once in the dim light, and then I saw it. Her necklace, a new one, gold, small diamond at the center. I knew it was new because I'd helped with the payment. Not directly, of course, but in the way my pension kept their bills light. Help came in many forms. Mine had just been quiet. "Your things are by the stairs," she added without looking up. I cleared my throat, but it felt useless, like trying to pour water into a closed jar. "Okay," I said finally. The hallway felt longer as I turned away. The TV murmured from the living room, some cooking show, cheerful and bright. It clashed with the thick quiet between us. As I reached the stairs, I looked back one last time. She was fluffing a towel now, smiling at something on the screen. I'd been folded out of the way like everything else. The bulb above buzzed faintly as I stepped onto the basement floor. The concrete felt colder than I remembered, biting through my socks like the cold had hands of its own. My mattress was propped against the far wall, leaning like it had been waiting. It was the same one James and I picked out after our 25th anniversary. He'd tested 3 just to find one soft enough for my back. I remember how he'd bounced on it in the store, making me laugh like a schoolgirl. Now it smelled like wet walls. I stood there a long while, just looking. My pillow, already folded, my quilt tucked under one arm of an old folding chair. No note, no explanation, just placement, like I'd been moved to storage. I laid the mattress down slowly, careful not to scrape the wall. My knees cracked as I bent, but I didn't complain. The sound of my own body aging was better than the silence above. As I smoothed the sheet over the foam, the scent of detergent mixed with something sour, mildew maybe, or thyme. My fingers brushed over a wrinkle and paused there. "I still sleep on your side," I whispered into the air, not expecting it to carry. The room didn't echo. It was swallowed. I sat down gently, then ran my hand along the seam. The seam James always tugged at when he couldn't sleep. I pressed my palm there now, grounding myself in what little comfort remained. My words weren't needed. My ache spoke louder. There was no window, just a small metal vent set high in the wall. I stared at it from the mattress, watching headlights flicker across it every so often, like stars that didn't belong to me, like reminders that life was still moving, just not here. I pulled my coat tighter around me even though I was indoors. The air in the basement wasn't just cold, it was still, like it had settled years ago and never left. Upstairs I could hear footsteps, muffled, slow. They never came down. I closed my eyes, then opened them again. The vent glowed faintly, backlit by some passing car. It gave me just enough light to see the corners of the room. My suitcase, a stack of towels, my Bible, the one James had underlined in blue ink. I rolled onto my side and listened, to the heater humming through the wall, to the creak of pipes, to the sound of a home that no longer included me. I told myself it was temporary, but the silence disagreed. Silence here didn't feel like peace. It felt like being set aside, like being told, "You've had your turn." I reached for my shawl and wrapped it around my shoulders, tucking the ends beneath my arms. I whispered into the dark, "I'm still here." Not loud, just enough to hear, it said. I didn't undress. I didn't even unlace my shoes. I lay down in my coat, zipped all the way up, like armor. The mattress dipped beneath me, but I didn't sink. I stayed on the surface, alert. My purse was beside me, and inside it, the envelope. I slid my hand in and felt for it. Stiff paper, thick edges. I held it like a spine, like something holy. That envelope had become more than legal protection. It was a boundary. It was dignity. It was the part of James that still stood guard. The basement was so quiet I could hear the pipes ticking above. The heat barely reached this far. My breath came out in faint fog, and I watched it disappear. They hadn't said goodnight. No one. Checked if I had a blanket, but I didn't cry. Tears felt too heavy for this cold. Instead, I listened to the house forget I existed. The creaks didn't call my name. The fridge didn't hum like it used to when I sat upstairs reading. Nothing in this place recognized me now, but I knew who I was. I curled tighter, pulled the blanket to my chin, and tucked the envelope close. Not for safety, but for remembering, because even in silence, even down here, I was not lost. I lay there, the bulb overhead casting a tired yellow across the ceiling. My hand found the edge of the purse, slow and steady. I didn't rush. Some things deserve ceremony, even in private. I slid the envelope out and held it to my chest. The Sayu paper was cold, but the weight was familiar. I closed my eyes and let my fingers trace the edge of it. I could see James's signature in my mind, strong, certain. I whispered, "You knew," because he did. This paper meant I wasn't at their mercy, that I still had choices, that I hadn't been forgotten by everyone. I didn't need to shout it or prove it. This wasn't revenge. It was preservation. I held it close like a spine, straight and necessary. There was nothing else in this house that belonged to me. But this did. I didn't fall asleep for a long time. I just lay there, breathing slow, feeling the envelope rise and fall with my chest. It didn't make me powerful. It reminded me I was not powerless. The powdered sugar sifted gently from the spoon like snowfall, soft and white, across golden squares. I could still feel the warmth coming off the lemon bars. They were his favorite, always had been. I used to cut them in triangles for his lunchbox when he was in 2nd grade. Today, I kept the squares neat, precise, like I still believed presentation might matter. The kitchen smelled like citrus and butter. The winter sun came through the window in streaks, lighting up the edges of the pan. I smiled, not out of pride, but out of habit. That kind of quiet, hopeful smile a mother wears when she's done something small, but good. Then I heard it, upstairs. My name, sharp like a pebble against glass. "She's a burden, Hannah, you said it yourself." My hand stopped. The spoon hovered in midair. The sugar drifted down without aim, landing in a crooked pile. I didn't move. I stared at the bars, the neat rows, the yellow softness just beginning to set. The warmth that had filled the room only moments ago started to drain from my chest. There was no laughter after the words, just the silence that follows truth you weren't meant to hear. The scent of lemon, once so sweet, began to turn bitter in the back of my throat. I stood there, tray in my hands, frozen like the house around me. And in that moment, everything bright in the kitchen dulled. I had made something from scratch, and in return, I was made small. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The words carried anyway, sliding down the stairwell like cold water. I could feel them before I even processed them. "She's a burden." That's what he said. I blinked, staring at the carpet beneath my shoes. The lemon bars still sat behind me on the counter. The smell had followed me, but it didn't comfort me anymore. The air in the hallway was still. The kind of stillness that waits for someone to break it. But no one does. Upstairs, their voices murmured again. Lower this time. Like they'd realized I could hear them, or maybe just didn't care enough to stop. My fingers curled around the edge of the wall. I wasn't steady, but I wasn't falling. Not yet. She's a burden. I had changed his diapers. I'd held him when he had night terrors. I stayed up when he had the flu and sat beside him at every spelling bee. I had taught him to say please and thank you. And now I was the weight he didn't want to carry. I didn't cry, but I felt something shift. Something in me pulled back, like a hand from a hot stove. He wasn't the boy I raised anymore. He was someone who saw me not as a person, but as a problem to be managed. "Do you want more tea?" I heard her say. Her voice was calm. "I'm good," he replied. Then the floor creaked overhead. Casual footsteps. No rush. No regret. I stood still, alone in the quiet house, knowing that part of me had been erased in their conversation, and they wouldn't even notice what was missing. My hands were trembling, but I didn't let go. The tray was warm, and the lemon bars sat quietly, untouched. I stared at them for a beat longer, then took a breath. I bent down slowly, each movement deliberate, like I was handling something sacred. I placed the tray gently on the floor, right at the bottom of the stairs. My hands hovered over it for a moment, as if to say, "You still matter, even if no one was listening." The carpet beneath me was soft, older, the King James and I once argued over when picking it out. Now it held my shadow like it remembered me. The scent of lemon still filled the air, sharp and sweet, but it didn't feel the same. It clung to me like a memory I hadn't chosen to keep. I stood up slowly, careful, not to let my knees creak too loud. The silence in the stairwell felt thick, heavy. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. That tray on the floor became my final offering, for the boy I once raised, for the home I no longer recognized, for the woman I was still trying to protect inside myself. I turned toward the door with quiet dignity, letting the silence speak louder than I ever could. The cold hit my cheeks like a slap, sharp, immediate, almost welcome. I pulled my sweater tighter across my chest and stepped out onto the path. The snow was crusted over, half melted, salted. It crunched under my shoes, each step louder than the last. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to leave the air that had called me a burden. Sunlight reflected off the ice in little bursts, too bright to enjoy. It didn't warm me. It just reminded me how exposed I felt. His voice echoed in my head. She's a burden. The words had already settled deep, but out here they seemed to trail behind me like a shadow I couldn't shake. The mailbox was in view now, its red flag down, rust curling at the edges. I focused on that. A goal. Something small to walk toward. My eyes stung, not from tears, but from wind. It bit at my face, reminding me I was alone, and yet still standing. I walked slower the closer I got. Each step felt like leaving a piece of something behind, disbelief maybe, hope. The house behind me didn't call. No door opened. No voice asked where I was going. I reached up and touched the edge of my scarf, pulled it tighter around my neck. One more step, and then another, and another, until the air between us wasn't silence. It was distance. The metal was cold under my fingers. I hadn't brought any letters. I stood at the mailbox holding nothing, doing nothing, just breathing. Just being. I don't even know why I walked there. Maybe I needed to carry something. Maybe I just needed to move. The wind had died down a little. The neighborhood was still. Too still. Not even a dog barked, no cars, just the distant smell of chimney smoke and the faint ticking of the world, going on without me. I leaned on the mailbox, hand resting lightly on top, like it might understand what I couldn't say aloud. There had been a time I sent out Christmas cards from this very spot. Birthday checks, postcards from the coast with "Wish you were here" scrawled in blue pen. Now I stood with empty hands, not sad, just empty. And I realized, standing there, that this silence was the answer to questions I hadn't been brave enough to ask. I didn't need anyone to scream. They'd already said everything they needed to say, and the quiet they left behind was louder than all of it. When I stepped back into the kitchen, it felt colder than when I left. The oven had shut off, and the warmth was gone from the air. The lemon bars still sat on the tray, untouched. I stared at them for a long moment. No one had come down. The scent of lemons still lingered faintly on my fingers, but it had faded from the room, replaced by something emptier. Something that didn't smell like home anymore. I pulled a sheet of foil from the drawer. The sound of it crinkling was too loud in the quiet kitchen. I covered the bars one by one, pressing the foil down with the palm of my hand, like it mattered. Wasn't sure why I wrapped them. Maybe to keep them fresh. Maybe to keep myself useful. Maybe because even when kindness is dismissed, it still feels better to finish what you started. I placed the tray on the corner of the counter, away from the stove. The kind of place you put things when you're not sure what to do with them next. I looked around the kitchen. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I turned off the light, walked out, and left the sweetness behind. The bell above the bank door chimed softly, not loud or urgent, just a gentle note that marked my entrance. It reminded me of an old clock James once restored, a sound full of memory instead of time. As I stepped inside, the warmth hit me slowly. It wasn't hot, but it was kind. The kind of warmth that feels like someone remembering to leave the heat on for you. The late afternoon sun poured in through the tall windows, painting long golden lines across the floor. The air smelled faintly of leather chairs and something sweet, peppermint maybe, from a bowl near the teller window. I walked carefully, not because I was unsure, but because this place carried a certain stillness. The quiet was clean, respectful. There was a man at the desk near the corner. He looked up briefly, nodded once, and then returned to whatever he was doing. That small gesture, the acknowledgement, felt more human than most of what I'd been getting lately. For a moment, I imagined James beside me, his elbow gently brushing mine like he used to do in public, just to let me know he was there. I could almost hear him saying, "You've got this, hon." I walked toward the front desk, straightening the strap of my purse. I wasn't here to ask for permission. I was here to be seen, really seen. The man at the desk glanced up when I approached, and something about his eyes made me pause. He couldn't have been more than 30, but there was a steadiness in his expression that didn't belong to someone young. It reminded me of James, not in looks, but in patience. "Mrs. Hart?" he asked. "Yes," I replied, smoothing the front of my sweater. He smiled, the corners of his mouth turning up like he genuinely meant it. "Come on in. We've got everything ready." I followed him into a smaller office near the window. The glass was frosted at the bottom, casting soft shadows along the walls. A clock ticked gently behind his desk, slow and rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. He opened a folder and began flipping through a few pages. His fingers moved confidently but carefully, like someone who understood the weight of what each line meant. "I'll go over this with you step by step," he said. "Thank you." "I appreciate that," I murmured, watching him. He looked up and chuckled at something in the paperwork, some bureaucratic line, no doubt, and that laugh. It wasn't loud, but it had depth and warmth, the kind that sneaks past your defenses. My chest tightened, but not in pain. It was something softer. That laugh, that pause, the way he held eye contact, it brought James back for a split second, not as a ghost, but as a kindness. "I know it's a lot," he said. I smiled. "It's not the paperwork that's heavy." He nodded gently, like he understood, even if he didn't know the full story. And in that quiet moment, something I hadn't felt in a long time returned, comfort that didn't ask me to explain itself. He slid the folder across the polished desk with both hands, careful, like he was handing over something more than just documents. I looked at the top page. My name was there, clear and centered. No joint names, no conditions. "You're the sole owner, ma'am," he said, voice soft but certain. I didn't answer right away. The paper sat in front of me, its corners sharp, its truth sharper. My name, untouched, not shared, not questioned, just mine. I stared at it, not because I doubted it, but because hearing it aloud did something to me. Like a rope had been quietly cut from around my ribs. My fingers brushed the edge of the page. The sunlight spilled across the desk in wide swaths, warming the paper where his hands had just been. A heater vent below gently stirred the air, but I didn't move. I'd known this was true. I'd read the papers before, but having it spoken made it real in a new way, like someone else finally saw what I'd carried alone for so long. I took a breath, not shaky, just full. And as I exhaled, I didn't feel small. I felt whole. He waited respectfully, no rush, in his posture. "Thank you," I said simply, and that was enough. I lifted the folder with both hands, holding it close before I tucked it into my purse. I didn't rush. My fingers lingered on the leather edges like they were touching something sacred. It wasn't just paper. It was proof. Not just of ownership, but of presence. Of everything James had done to make sure I wouldn't be left behind. The folder nestled into the bottom of my purse with a quiet thunk. This time, the weight didn't drag me down. It held me upright, like armor tucked beneath soft fabric. The sunlight through the windows had begun to shift, long shadows stretching across the lobby floor. Outside, the sky was turning that gentle shade of gold you only see in winter, the kind that doesn't promise warmth, but at least offers peace. Near the teller counter, a small bowl of peppermint candies caught the light. I reached in and took one, unwrapped it slowly, letting the crisp scent fill my nose. I didn't feel invisible in that room. I felt seen. And as I stood near the exit, adjusting the strap of my purse, I realized the strength I carried didn't have to be loud, it just had to be mine. The door swung open behind me, letting in a gust of winter air. I stepped outside, the cold brushing across my cheeks like an exhale. "Just call me if you ever need anything," he'd said as I left. I turned back briefly, and he was still standing behind the glass, giving a small wave. Not professional. Personal. I smiled, not with flirtation, not with sadness. It was the kind of smile you give when someone surprises you with decency. When kindness appears in a world that has recently grown stingy with it, I adjusted my purse under my arm. It feels heavier now, but not in a bad way. "James," I whispered under my breath, just once. Not because I was grieving, but because I was grateful. Grateful that, even in his absence, he still gave me these moments. The sidewalk stretched ahead, long and familiar. The sun had dipped lower, but there was still light left. I didn't rush. For the first time in a long while, I walked forward, not with doubt, but with quiet purpose. The suitcase sat on the bed like it already knew the path ahead. I didn't pack much, just the essentials: socks, warm sweaters, my toothbrush, no photo frames, no keepsakes. I wasn't packing for memory, I was packing for motion. The radiator hummed softly in the corner, steady and low like a cat purring. The quilt beneath the suitcase was the same one James and I used to curl under on snow days. I didn't fold it back. I just laid the suitcase right on top. I folded each shirt with care. Not tenderness, just intention. I didn't feel sad. I felt prepared. There's a difference. I held up a scarf he gave me once. I liked how the edges were frayed just enough to feel familiar. I folded that last. Then came the envelope. I placed it right in the center, nestled between sweaters. Not hidden, not displayed. Just there, like a compass. Like something that didn't guide me forward, but reminded me not to turn back. The zipper moved slow under my fingers, the sound soft and final. When I stood back, the suitcase looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I'd just grown into someone who needed less, and that in itself was something to carry. The house was still when I moved through it. Not quite, still. That kind of sleep-heavy stillness that comes before the sun, where walls breathe slowly and floors hold their creaks. I stepped softly, my shoes muffled against the carpet. My hand brushed the stair rail as I passed, careful not to make a sound. I didn't want to wake anyone, not out of fear, out of respect for myself. The hallway stretched in front of me, dim and long. The kitchen light was off, and the air purifier buzzed gently in the corner, just loud enough to hide my exit, just quiet enough to sound like a memory. I didn't leave a note. What would I say? Thanks for the basement? Instead, I left the air infused with lemon. The purifier would keep running for hours, cycling through the scent I had clung to for months, citrus and polish and all the warmth I once offered this place. I passed the family room where his shoes still lay kicked off near the couch. A throw, pillow sat crooked. Someone would come down and fix it, never knowing I was already gone. I paused at the front door. My fingers hesitated on the knob, not because I doubted, but because this door had closed behind me so many times. This was the last. I turned the knob slowly. The cold air outside pressed in like a whisper of goodbye. But I didn't look back. I stepped into the morning like it belonged to me. The bus station bench was crowded, but no one looked at each other. The air smelled like diesel and cheap coffee, and I could see my breath rise as I sat. People sat with their luggage close, their eyes distant. Some nodded off, their chins resting on their chests. Others stared at their phones, waiting for a ride, or something more. I sat there a long while, watching them, watching the bus pull in and out. I could have boarded. No one would have stopped me. It was easier, familiar. But that was the problem. Everything about that bench felt too familiar. People, going nowhere they wanted to be, moving out of habit instead of hope. I looked down at my suitcase. It felt heavier there somehow, like the choice itself was anchoring me. Then I heard it, the distant hum of a train on the next track over. Turned toward the sound. The platform stretched open, the tracks gleaming like a new sentence waiting to be written. Steel wheels, long rails, the kind of motion that meant something. I stood. My fingers tightened around the suitcase handle. I walked toward the train. Not because it was easier, but because it wasn't. Because it meant I was finally choosing something for myself. And that was worth everything. The platform greeted me with a breath of cold air and the soft crunch of frost beneath my boots. The sky was just beginning to shift, still blue-black, but warming at the edges like a promise being kept. I wrapped my scarf tighter and stood near the edge, close, but not reckless. A vending cart sat nearby, steam curling from a small spout as the man inside handed paper cups to sleepy passengers. I took one too. I didn't even want the coffee. I just wanted something warm in my hands, something to hold while I waited. The first train hadn't arrived yet, but the space it would fill was already alive, the air buzzing faintly, a soft vibration you can feel if you stand still long enough. I sipped from the cup, and the bitterness startled me, grounding me. Across the tracks, a pigeon hopped along the edge of the bench. The wind tugged gently at my coat, reminding me I was still here. No one was waiting for me, no one stood beside me, but I didn't feel alone. I felt whole. I watched my breath rise in little clouds, steady and slow. The frost on the platform sparkled where the first light touched it. I didn't have a destination written on my heart, just a direction, and that was enough. I stepped up into the train with no hesitation. There was no one behind me to wave to, no one in front of me to follow. Just the soft thud of my suitcase wheels and the conductor's faint voice announcing departure. I found a seat by the window, pressed my hand against the glass. It was cold, fogged slightly from the morning breath of others who had sat here before. Outside, the platform blurred into motion. No one asked where I was going. No one demanded I explain why I left. And for the first time, I didn't offer an explanation, not even to myself. The rhythmic clatter beneath the floor started low, then stronger, like a heartbeat kicking into motion. I closed my eyes for a second, felt the sway of the car, the tilt into something new. The weight in my chest didn't vanish. It just shifted, spread out, like light through a fogged window. Not heavy now, just forward. And I didn't take permission. Took the train. It had been over 30 years since I'd last seen that porch. But as soon as I turned the corner onto her gravel drive, there it was, facing west like it always had, catching every drop of evening sun like a wide, waiting hand. The house looked a little older, paint faded in spots, but it stood proud, sturdy. The kind of place that didn't need to shout to say you're safe here. I parked under the same oak tree we used to lie under as girls, staring at clouds and making up stories about the future. I stepped out of the car slowly, letting the air settle around me. It smelled like fresh dough and cut grass, and underneath it, something deeper, like bread rising and something long remembered. The screen door creaked open before I knocked. Marlene stood there with flour on her cheek and hands on her hips, the same way she used to wait outside our dorm room when she had gossip too good to hold in. She didn't say anything right away, just looked at me, really looked. Then she smiled. "You still crinkle your nose when you park," she said. I laughed, though it cracked a little. "Come on in, honey. Supper's nearly done." Her arms didn't hesitate. They wrapped around me like I hadn't disappeared for decades, like grief hadn't changed our phone calls into holidays only. I stepped up onto the porch. The wood still creaked in the same spots, under the left rocker and near the post where we used to tie notes in mason jars. Something inside me softened then. I didn't even know I'd been holding myself that tight. I followed her into the house without needing to ask where the kitchen was. Some things shift, others stay exactly where you left them. I walked back out to the porch while the cobbler baked, letting the screen door swing behind me with its familiar slap. The swing sat near the far end, nestled between two wide beams. It was painted blue. Now, but the frame was the same. I sat down slowly, carefully. The swing shifted beneath me with a soft sigh, like it remembered how to hold me. The cushion was new, firm, and floral. But the rhythm, that gentle sway, the creak just right of center, that hadn't changed. It rocked me back into something quieter, something older. The breeze moved through the magnolia trees, curling around the porch like a shawl. It tugged at my hair, a little wild from the drive. I let it. I leaned back and closed my eyes for a moment. The air smelled like pine and old stories. I opened my eyes and looked out at the yard. Same bird bath, same crooked mailbox post, same view of the road turning amber in the spring dusk. This porch had heard our college secrets, our dumb crushes, our prayers for futures we didn't yet understand. Now it held me again, less girl, more woman, but still known. Marlene walked out carrying 2 bowls and 2 spoons, steam rising from both. She didn't ask if I wanted any. She just handed it over, ceramic warm against my fingers. "You still take yours plain, right?" she said. I nodded. "No. Ice cream." "Still a shame," she said, settling beside me. I took a bite, and everything paused. The flavor hit like memory: cinnamon, butter, roasted peach. The same recipe she made during finals week when I failed that math exam and locked myself in the laundry room for 3 hours. I nearly cried. Not from sadness. Just the way something good can find you again when you didn't know it was still. "Looking good?" she asked, watching me with a knowing grin. "Too good," I said, setting my spoon down just to breathe. The fireflies were coming out now, blinking softly across the yard. The porch light clicked on with a quiet hum. Marlene's laugh bubbled up again, low, wide, full-bodied like always, the kind of laugh that could carry weight without cracking under it. "I've missed this," I said, not meaning the cobbler. She nodded. "Me too." And just like that, we didn't need to say how hard things had been. The years, the losses, the stretch between visits. The peach cobbler did the talking, and I listened. We sat without speaking for a few minutes after dessert, our spoons resting in empty bowls on the porch rail. The sky was soft now, twilight folded into itself, blue slipping toward indigo. Marlene leaned back in her chair and sighed. "You can stay as long as you want, you know." She said it like it wasn't the first time she'd thought of it. Didn't answer right away. I just looked out at the trees, their leaves swaying gently in the evening breeze. The porch creaked under my feet like it approved of her words. She didn't press. That was her gift. Marlene always knew how to offer without demanding. I stared at the edge of the yard, where the light faded into shadow. I wasn't used to staying. I was used to earning my keep, proving my presence, apologizing for it even when I hadn't been asked to. But her voice hadn't held pity. It held space. I glanced at her, and she just gave a little nod. So I stayed quiet, letting her words settle into the hollow places I hadn't realized were still empty. The porch swing rocked slowly. Neither of us spoke much after the fireflies came out. We sat there, shoulder to shoulder, bowls long empty, and not a single person asked if we were going to clean up. No one hinted that bedtime had come. No one reminded me that guests should retreat. So I didn't. I leaned back against the swing cushion and let the sound of frogs rise from the nearby ditch. Somewhere across the field, laughter floated in, maybe from a neighbor's porch, maybe from the past. The night air clung with the soft scent of peaches, sugar still drifting from the kitchen. Marlene yawned but didn't move. Neither did I. For the first time in years, I didn't feel in the way. I didn't feel like something extra, like noise to be hushed. I felt placed. The porch lights glowed like quiet lanterns, not asking for attention, just holding the dark back. And as the swing rocked gently beneath me, I felt a sleep edge in. Not the heavy kind, but the kind that comes when you know you're safe. I stayed, and the night stayed with me. Marlene and I sat at her kitchen table with a silver bowl between us, filled halfway with peeled apple slices, the kind that starts to brown at the edges if you don't move quick enough. But we weren't rushing. We peeled slowly, letting the skins curl off in soft red ribbons, each one falling into a little pile beside the bowl like loose threads. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floor, warm and golden, lighting up dust motes and a few dried leaves that had drifted in from the porch. The lace curtain swayed gently, stirred by a breeze that carried the crisp scent of fall. Apple skin, cinnamon sticks on the counter, and a faint whisper of something dry and earthy, like leaf piles in October. "You still peel like a lefty," Marlene said, smiling as she twisted the stem off another Granny Smith. I shrugged. Only ever learned one way. We didn't talk much beyond that. We didn't have to. There was something sacred in that silence. The kind that happens only when you know you've earned your seat, not out of courtesy, but out of history. Our fingers got sticky with juice. She passed me a paper towel. I tucked it beneath the bowl and kept peeling. Every now and then, the silver bowl clinked when we dropped a slice in. That sound, soft, steady, felt like something to trust, like rhythm returning to a life that had forgotten it. I looked over at her hands, older now, like mine, but sure. The same hands that once held mine during finals week, that brought soup when James was sick, that now peeled apples beside me without asking for explanation or permission. Didn't have to work this morning. I was already part of it, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. I had just sliced the last apple when the phone rang. Once, then again. Not urgent, but not casual either. Marlene wiped her hands and passed it over with a look that asked nothing. "Hello? Mrs. Hart?" the voice on the other end said. It was the lawyer. I recognized his even tone, the steady cadence he used when delivering things that shouldn't be dramatic, but always were. "Yes," I replied. "They're contesting the title." His words came clear, precise, like a blade that doesn't slip, just cuts straight through. I stared at the knife in my hand, the apple juice on the cutting board glistening beneath it. The slices were done, layered neatly like pages in a quiet story. "I see," I said. There was no panic, no breath caught in my throat, just a calm that had been waiting for this moment. A calm I hadn't even known I'd prepared. I wiped my hands slowly on the apron, folded the towel once, then again. The wall clock ticked behind me, its sound suddenly louder now that the phone had gone quiet. Through the open window, I could hear the faint bells from the church a few blocks away, chiming like nothing had changed, but something had. I turned to the shelf near the pantry, eyes settling on the tin box tucked between the cookbooks and my old recipe cards. It had waited long enough. "They won't get far," I said simply, and ended the call. Marlene raised her eyebrow. "Something serious?" "Just old business trying to pretend it still matters," I said, and I meant it. The tin box had been there for years, wedged beside my cinnamon roll recipe and a stack of yellowed Christmas cookie clippings. The corners were rusty, and the lid stuck a bit when I pulled it open, but it was reliable, always had been. I set it down on the table, the metal clicking softly against the wood. The light from the window caught the edge of the lid as I lifted it, casting a brief glint across. The apples we'd just peeled, inside was the envelope, still crisp, still sealed. James's handwriting on the corner, sharp and sure. I hadn't unfolded it in a long time, not because I was unsure of what it said, but because I hadn't needed to see it. Until now. I slid it out slowly, laid it flat in front of me. My fingers brushed over the crease, the signature. His name, bold as ever. A line drawn in ink that said, "I believed in you." Even if they forget, I didn't. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt covered. Protected by the foresight of a man who knew love didn't end with goodbye, who had built me a shield long before I'd realize I'd need one. I closed the lid gently, pressing it shut like a quiet promise. Then I sat back and breathed, not with relief, but with certainty. Let the storm come. I already had shelter. Bye. Paper felt firm again in my hands, cool, but not cold. I folded the deed back along its crease with slow, practiced care. My name was written clearly, James's signature beside it, both exactly where they needed to be. I slid the document into its envelope, pressed the flap closed with the flat of my palm, and set it back on the table. Marlene didn't say a word. She just watched me with that same quiet knowing she always had. "They think paper will protect them," I said. "They've forgotten what I've lived through." She nodded, slicing a lemon peel into thin curls for the pie. "Let them try." I smiled, not out of pride, but out of peace, out of the deep, calm confidence that comes from surviving what tried to undo you. I folded the edges of the apron in my lap, picked up the spoon, and stirred the apples simmering on the stove. The scent was thick now, sweet, spiced, rich with everything rooted and real. The shadows in the kitchen stretched long across the floor, wrapping around the table legs like sleepy animals. The moment didn't feel like victory. It felt like the truth was finally sitting down beside me, and I welcomed it. The porch swing had been swaying gently until the sound of tires on gravel made it still. I stopped rocking, letting my feet rest flat on the boards. That sound, rubber crunching over stones, meant one of two things: someone arriving or someone lost enough to turn around in my drive. I watched from behind the screen door, hand lightly gripping the edge of the frame. The wind lifted a few dry leaves from the steps and carried them across the yard in lazy loops. The sky was overcast, heavy and soft like it might rain, but wasn't quite sure. The car door opened slow. He stepped out like he wasn't sure this was where he meant to be. His coat was thin, too thin for the chill that had crept into the breeze. I used to remind him every October to dress warm. Pride, I've learned, never remembers the forecast. He looked older than the last time I saw him, but not in the way age wears a face. In the way regret changes the way someone holds themselves. Tighter shoulders, uncertain posture. He didn't rush up the steps. He just stood there a moment, hands in his pockets, like maybe he thought the house would open itself. It didn't. I waited, letting the silence stretch, letting him decide what to do next. He walked up the steps with careful feet, like the boards might reject him. I opened the screen door just before he reached it, and we stood there facing each other, not quite close enough to touch. "Why didn't you just say something?" he asked. The words fell between us with a dull crack, like dropping a plate that doesn't shatter, but doesn't stay whole either. I looked at him, really looked. Not at the man he'd become, with tired eyes and a voice he didn't seem to trust, but at the boy who once ran barefoot through sprinklers, giggling when worms wriggled in the grass. That boy lived in my memory, soft and bright. The man in front of me was someone else entirely. I didn't answer right away. There was a crow calling in the distance, once, then quiet. The breeze pulled gently at the hem of my sweater, sharp and cool like fall air always is. He shifted his weight. "I didn't know it got that bad," he said, quieter now. Still, I stayed silent, because explaining pain to the person who caused it isn't as easy as words, because sometimes the silence carries more weight than anything you could say. I studied the lines in his face. They weren't smiling. After a while, I stepped back just enough to open the door wider. "Are you coming in?" I asked. He nodded. Eyes lowered, and I let him cross the threshold, into the porch, into the moment, but not into forgiveness. Not yet. He stepped into the hallway and looked around like a stranger walking through a museum. His shoes echoed on the hardwood. Just enough sound to make it clear he'd never spent time here, not like I had. "This is nice," he said. I didn't answer. I just watched him walk slowly, his eyes catching on the framed print near the stairs, the little vase James bought in Savannah, the corner table I'd stained myself during the first week Marlene let me move in. Each plank of wood beneath his feet carried history. James had laid this floor with his own hands, his tools, his sweat. The man my son never thanked. I didn't have to say it. The floor said it for me. I motioned toward the living room, and he followed. "This place feels peaceful," he said. "It is." His fingers brushed the edge of the mantel, where a photo of me and James sat beside a candle. He straightened it out of habit. I didn't stop him, but I noticed. He paused, turning toward me like he wanted to ask something. Maybe how I'd managed to find something this solid. Maybe how I looked taller now, even though I hadn't grown a single inch. He didn't speak. The air between us was warm with wood polish and something unspoken. And still, I stood in my home, not the one he moved me out of, but the one I chose. And I didn't shrink. He wandered through the room with that same restless energy I remembered from his teenage years, like he was looking for a distraction, something to pick up, to make himself useful. But there was nothing broken here. Not the shelves, not the chairs, not me. His eyes scanned the walls, the bookshelves, the quiet photos arranged without apology. Each one told a story he hadn't shown up for. He paused near the window, running a thumb along the frame. "I didn't think it had gotten that far," he said. I didn't respond, because I wasn't interested in guilt. Not now, not from him. I wasn't looking for tears or some confession whispered into the still air. I didn't need his shame. I needed him to see that I had built peace without him. "Who helped you move?" he asked after a moment. I shrugged. "People who didn't need a reason." He looked back at me, eyes searching. I didn't know how far things had gone. If you had, I said gently, I still would have left. His mouth opened like he might argue, but he didn't. The clock on the wall ticked softly, steady as ever. A faint smell of tea still lingered from the cup I had made that morning, the one I drank alone with both hands cradling it, not out of sadness, but out of choice. I turned and sat down in the chair nearest the window, the one with James's old quilt draped over the arm. He didn't sit. He just stood there, holding silence like it was something fragile. And I let him. We were back on the porch. The sky was shifting, clouds pulling apart just enough to let a little light slip through. The trees moved softly, their leaves whispering in the breeze. The air was cool, but not sharp, just enough to feel awake. I leaned against the porch railing, hands tucked together, watching the way the leaves twirled to the ground one by one. He stood beside me, arms folded, unsure of how to fill the space. "When you left," he started, then stopped. I turned to him. "I didn't leave to punish you." He looked up at that, surprised maybe. "I left to remember who I was," I said. My voice was steady, not cold, just settled. I paused. I needed a room where I didn't feel small, a day that didn't start with walking on eggshells. I needed to be in a place that didn't ask me to shrink just to fit in. He looked like he wanted to respond, but there wasn't space for it yet. Not that kind of space. The wind stirred again, brushing a few strands of hair across my cheek. I let them stay. I wasn't trying to make him feel worse. I just needed to speak the truth, not for him, for me. "I'm not angry anymore," I added. He blinked. "I'm just not coming back to the version of me that stayed quiet to be welcome." And with that, I turned back to the trees. Let the truth hang there like leaves about to fall, and I didn't rush to fill the silence. It had its own kind of healing. Each morning, before the sun fully clears the trees, I take one watering can in each hand. Not plastic ones. Tin. They clang a little against my knees when I walk, and the handles press into my palms with a quiet insistence, but I don't mind. They're lighter than they look. Or maybe I've just grown stronger. The grass is still, wet when I step outside, my slippers damp before I reach the garden path. The air smells of cool rosemary and that soft metallic scent only old tin can carry. A breeze rustles the nearby trees, their branches waving like they've been waiting for me. My knees ache, of course. They always do. But the pain is familiar, like an old friend that complains but still shows up. I walk slowly, but steadily. This little patch of ground has taught me the way I move, the time I come, the weight of my steps. And I've learned it too. Where the soil holds water, where the roots drink deepest, where to tread lightly. Each pour from the can is a small offering. Not flashy, not loud, just mine. And when the morning light spills down and catches the edge of the watering spout, I swear it looks like the earth exhaling. There was a time I needed walls to steady me, a chair to lower myself into slowly, a hand on my elbow when the ground felt too far away. I don't need them anymore. Now I walk across the yard upright. Slow, yes, but upright. The ache in my back doesn't scare me. My joints creak like old porch boards, but they carry me just the same. I used to think pain meant something was wrong. Now I think it just means I'm still here. The dew is lifting this morning, turning to mist in the rising sun. The birds are already busy, wrens hopping along the fence line like they have something to prove. I don't. My steps are sure, even when they wobble, because everyone is mine alone. I bend to pull a weed, and my fingers move slowly through the dirt. I don't wince. I don't brace myself. I just move. No one's watching. No one needs to. I don't lean on anything. Not because I can't, but because I no longer feel the need to ask the world to catch me. I've caught myself. The garden doesn't ask questions. It doesn't judge. It doesn't matter if I change my mind 3 times before settling the lavender along the path instead of near the porch. It simply receives. I kneel in the soil and let my hands disappear into the warm, forgiving earth. The dirt gets under my nails and I let it. The bees buzz softly near the rosemary bush, too busy to bother with me. This patch of land is mine. No one tells me how many tomatoes are enough. No one rolls their eyes when I plant marigolds near the cucumbers just because I like the way the yellow pops against all that green. I plant what I want, when I want. I slide a row of tulip bulbs into the loosened ground, placing them gently, like secrets I trust the earth to keep. I pat them down, cover them carefully, whispering nothing in particular, just humming, just being. The sun warms my shoulders. The scent of lavender follows every breeze. My knees press into the padded mat I keep tucked under the bench, and for once there's no one here asking why I'm still doing all this myself. Because it's not work, it's living, and the garden never once asks for permission. It simply grows when it's ready, and so do I. There's a spot along the fence that used to stay bare no matter what I tried to plant there. I called it the stubborn patch. For years, I let it be, just soil and shadows. It reminded me too much of other things that had gone quiet. That's where I planted the rose bush. It wasn't planned. I just had the clipping in my hand one day, and before I could overthink it, I dug a hole. Now, months later, the bush stretches high, branches tipped in red blooms so vivid they almost hum. I reach out, fingertips brushing the edge of a petal. It's soft, softer than it looks, like strength disguised as beauty. Or maybe the other way around. The breeze carries the scent up to me, deep, earthy, sweet like memory. The roses sway slightly, nodding like they know what it took to get. Here. I kneel beside them and pull a weed from the base. My hand lingers in the soil a second longer than needed. This space, this exact spot, was once where I cried without sound, where I doubted myself most. Now it's blooming, not because I forced it, but because I gave it time. I won't forget what happened here, but I refuse to let it be the end of the story. If you're listening, and if you've ever been made to feel small, invisible, unworthy, come closer. Let me tell you something. They don't get to decide who you are. Not the ones who left you out. Not the ones who mocked your efforts or questioned your usefulness. Not the ones who looked right through you and then called it kindness. You get to decide. Every morning, I carry water in both hands, not because it's easy, but because I can. I plant what I want. I grow what makes me smile. I sit on my porch swing and I remember the days I thought I'd never get here. But I did. And so will you. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not done. There's still soil to turn, still things to grow, still warmth left in the sun. The world will try to label you, but the garden just waits. And when you arrive, tired and uncertain, it opens. So pick up the watering can. Start where you are. Your worth was never up for debate. If this story found a quiet place in you, maybe stay for the next one too. Just tap subscribe, so we can sit together again. And if you've carried your own weight through hard seasons, I'd be honored if you shared a bit of that below.